Emperor Trajan celebrates an extended series of games. If, however, you were of lower class, or you were a slave, then you were going to be killed fairly brutally. Ancient Rome perfected cruelty, like it was an art form. In amphitheaters across the empire, men were butchered for applause, women humiliated for spectacle, and animals turned into weapons. There would have been hundreds, if not 1,000 people along with all of these animals cramped together in the hypagon. Every emperor fought to leave a bloodier mark than the last. From prisoners fed to beasts while the crowd ate lunch to oceans dug out so thousands could drown, Ignatius is convinced that he's going to die violently. Rome's games weren't entertainment. They were inhumanity at its peak. Stick around. This gets darker. Number 5. Gladiators. Rome's ultimate entertainment. As far as we can trace it, gladiator fighting in Rome goes back to the year 264 BCE. It began when the sons of Decimus, Junius Brutus, staged 3 pairs of men at his funeral in the Forum Barium. Romans called the ritual a munus, a duty or gift to the dead. It was not meant as citywide entertainment at first. It was just a blood offering carried out in the shadow of grief, a lifetime of blood and victory. With that excuse, the Romans unleashed something far darker, grief warped into bloodshed. A spectacle that would consume thousands of lives, all to satisfy the crowd's hunger for amusement. Where did this idea even come from? The best archaeological match points to Campa in southern Italy. Tomb paintings from Paestum in the 4th century BCE show pairs of fighters staged at elite burials. Ancient writers argued back and forth about whether the custom was Etruscan or Campanian, but the painted walls of Paestum speak for themselves. Funeral combat was already happening in the south, and Rome simply copied it. Turning burials into bloody fight nights blurred the line between ritual and cruelty from the very beginning. From there, the numbers exploded. In the year 216 BCE, the funeral of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus stretched over 3 days and featured 22 pairs of fighters in the Forum. By the year 200, the count rose to 25 pairs. By 183, there were 120 fighters. But who were these men thrown into the sand? Most were enslaved people, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to the games. Rome even had a phrase for them: damnati adlad, the damned to the arena. A few free men signed up voluntarily as ocarati when debt or desperation left them cornered. You already have outside of the arena. Your cunning is sharper than any gladiator sword. I would not risk it on errands of foolish pride. We in agreement. But the moment you entered the trade, free or enslaved, you lost your standing. In Roman law, performers in the arena were labeled infames, formally disgraced. Caesar's own municipal law went so far as to ban anyone who bound himself to fight as a gladiator from ever holding public office. The contract spelled out the reality in black and white. The standard gladiator oath ran like this: to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. Those words survive in Petronius's Satyricon and echoed through other writers. A man literally signed his body over to torture and death. When a so-called sport begins with that kind of pledge, you already know how far across the moral line the whole system stood. This was no back-alley business either. Gladiator schools grew into full industries. The largest, the Ludus Magnus, stood right beside the Colosseum with an underground passage leading straight into the amphitheater. The training arena inside stretched about 206 by 138 feet, with seating wrapped around it like a private stadium. These schools drilled, housed, and disciplined men in bulk, creating an endless supply of fighters to feed Rome's appetite. Archaeology even lets us peek into their diets. A 2014 study of bones from the gladiator cemetery at Ephesus showed diets rich in plants and grains. The evidence also revealed they drank a tonic made of plant ash, loaded with minerals. Ancient nicknames called them the barley men. This was not some ancient wellness craze. It was a cheap way to keep battered bodies standing long enough to fight again. They even had doctors. The famous physician Galen, whose writings would shape medicine for centuries, started by tending to gladiators in Pergamum. He learned trauma surgery by patching their wounds and bragged about cutting death rates compared to his predecessor. But this was not compassion. It was efficiency. Gladiators were patched up not to be saved, but to be thrown back into the meat grinder. So what did the fights look like? They were not random brawl. They were carefully staged with set types of gladiators. One common matchup was a rhinoceros, armed with a net and a trident against a Caesar, who wore a sleek helmet and carried a heavy shield. Others, like the Myrmillo, the Hoplomachus, or the Thrax, all had their own unique weapons and armor. The whole point was to balance strengths and weaknesses, so the contest stayed exciting. And yes, they even had referees called the Sumar Rudis. These men stepped in to pause the action or separate fighters when things got too messy. We know this because ancient mosaics show them standing in the arena, and because of one chilling story carved into a gladiator's tombstone. It tells how he fought hard, won the match fair and square, yet still lost his life when the referee reversed the call. Stand down. So, was the famous thumbs down means death signal real? The truth is murky. The sponsor of the games, called the editor, was the one who decided whether a fighter lived or died. That editor might have been a rich politician looking to impress a crowd, or the emperor himself. Ancient writers talk about thumb gestures, but no one agrees on exactly what they meant. But in the end, it doesn't matter. One flick of a powerful man's hand could decide life or death for the man bleeding in the sand. Once more, Ginocchus proves himself a god of the arena. That wasn't sport. It was execution disguised as entertainment. And the injuries were brutal. Studies on skeletons found in the gladiator cemetery at Ephesus show many men died from heavy blows to the head.
Oh yes.
Even though most wore helmets. Some skulls carried the marks of final strikes delivered after the fight was over. Finishing blows by an executioner wielding a hammer, chillingly nicknamed the dispter. Other bones show healed wounds. Proof that fighters were patched up after battles and shoved back into the arena to face it all again. The pattern is clear. Rome squeezed every last drop of spectacle out of human bodies. Now, not every fight ended with death. Sometimes the battle was declared a draw, and a gladiator who showed incredible courage or skill could be spared. Owners also had a reason to keep their best men alive. It was expensive to train replacements, but that doesn't make it merciful. Every single fight was a gamble with mutilation, suffering, and death. The men had no rights. They were property forced to bleed for the crowd. That's why the system was cruel at its core. Politics made it even worse. In 65 BCE, Julius Caesar staged a show so massive it shook Rome. He gathered as many as 320 pairs of gladiators. Army of fighters meant to dazzle voters. Applause. The Senate had to step in and pass a law limiting how many gladiators one man could own just to rein him in. Still, Caesar used blood to buy loyalty. When election campaigns are won with human slaughter, it's clear society has lost its compass. The emperors took the excess to new heights. Augustus himself bragged in his memoir, The Resi, that around 10,000 men fought in his games, and about 3,500 wild animals were killed during his reign. Yes, let's place our stock in the wall. See what ends he may service. Think about that. Writing a body count into your autobiography as if it were something to be proud of. That tells you everything about how far Rome had fallen. And it wasn't just the fighters who were changed by the arena. The audience was too. The philosopher Seneca once admitted that after sitting through a midday show, he left more greedy, more ambitious, more cruel, and more inhuman. He was honest about what these games did. They trained people to enjoy suffering. It was no accident. The system was designed to corrupt everyone watching, but sometimes the machine cracked. In 73 BCE, a group of gladiators at Capua escaped and sparked a rebellion under Spartacus. They grew into a full army that shook Rome to its core. When the revolt was finally crushed, the survivors, around 6,000 of them, were crucified along the Iron Way. Their bodies lined the road for miles. A horrific warning hammered into anyone who dared to resist. Number 4. Naumachie. Rome's deadly water shows. Rome didn't invent sea battles. What it invented was the nightmare of staging them with no escape. The first time we hear of it is in the year 46 BCE CE. When Julius Caesar ordered a huge lake to be dug beside the Tiber River, he filled it with real warships. Sleek barimes, towering triumphs, and even the massive quincare, and then threw 2,000 condemned men onto the decks, while another 4,000 rowed them straight into battle. These weren't actors. They were prisoners of war, forced into floating death traps designed to ram, board, and sink. Caesar even gave the match a theme: Tyrians versus Egyptians. But every show ended the same way: broken ships, bodies in the water, and the lake stained red while the crowd roared. Augustus, Caesar's heir, went even bigger. In the year 2 BCE, he had a permanent basin built across the river in Transterum. In his own memoir, he bragged about the scale: a lake about 1,750 feet long and 1,165 feet wide, roughly 1/3 of a mile by just over 1/5 of a mile. On that artificial sea, Augustus claimed 3,000 fighters, not counting the oarsmen, clashed in 30 ramming ships and dozens of smaller boats. This was a man-made ocean dug into the heart of Rome just to stage mass killing. To keep the water flowing, Augustus even built a new aqueduct. It was called the Aqua Alcatina, sometimes the Aqua Augusta. Rome's water commissioner Fontinas admitted openly that the water was foul and undrinkable. It wasn't built for the city's thirst. It was built for blood. A channel of bad water poured straight into a lake so the condemned could drown on schedule. That is how far Rome was willing to go, laying stone, digging tunnels, and bending rivers just to fuel a killing ground. The battles themselves were savage. These were not choreographed shows. The ships carried real rams on their bows. Crews rowed at full speed, slammed into one another, and splintered wood on impact. Oars snapped, decks shook, and men were hurled overboard. In armor, they sank like stones. Those who stayed on deck fought with swords, spears, and even catapults. Once a ship broke formation or took a strike below the waterline, its men had two choices: climb an enemy hull and get butchered, or vanish under the surface. Claudius took it even further. In the year 52 CE, during his attempt to drain Lake Fucine, he staged a nomia on open water. His fighters were criminals already condemned to death. This is when the most famous line in gladiator history appeared. Before the battle began, the men cried out, "Those who are about to die, salute you." Claudius smirked and replied, "Or before forcing them to fight anyway." Ancient writers are clear. This was no standard ritual. It was a desperate plea from men who knew they were trapped. Guards ringed the shore. No one could swim to safety. When your ship went down, so did you. Even the themes were dressed up as lies. Caesar staged Tyrians against Egyptians. Augustus staged Greeks against Persians. Claudius staged Sicilians against Rhodians. But the names were just theater. The real story was that the emperor commanded ships, water, and human lives all at once, and the people of Rome sat safely on land and cheered. Augustus even built a spectator island inside his basin, connected by a private bridge, so the elite could sit dry while thousands drowned below them. Could the Colosseum itself have hosted sea battles? The answer is mixed. At the Colosseum's opening in the year 80, sources say Titus staged naval spectacles, but many historians believe he relied on Augustus's giant basin nearby. Later accounts claim miniature naval scenes might have been staged inside the amphitheater itself. But once Domitian dug the Hypogeum, a vast network of tunnels and lifts beneath the floor, flooding the Colosseum became impossible. After Augustus and the Flavians, the huge water shows became less common, but the idea lingered. In the year 109, the Emperor Trajan built the now Macchia Vaticanana near what is now Vatican Hill. It was smaller with bleachers, but the plan was the same: fill a basin, pack it with ships, and make sure the men inside had no way out. Number 3, Venunes, the Emperor's Wild Hunt. Benecones were the morning block of the games, and everyone in Rome knew what that meant. These weren't warm-ups before the gladiators came out. They were the headline act to start the day. Trained hunters called venators, or sometimes bestiari, walk into the sand to face wild animals while tens of thousands roared from the seats. The first time we can clearly trace it was back in the year 186 BCE, when Marcus Fulvius, Nobilior, celebrated his victory by unleashing lions and panthers into an arena. From then on, the hunts weren't just a novelty. They became tradition. And soon enough, no morning in the empire felt complete without blood on the sand. The arenas were designed for it. A lion didn't just stroll out of a gate. The Colosseum itself was a machine of surprise. Engineers filled the floor with fake groves, rocky ridges, pits, and rolling scenery. Beneath the sand ran the hypogeme, a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and lifts. Crews worked 60 giant wooden capstan, 40 of them raising animal cages straight up through trapdoors. The rest hoisted 12 by 15 feet platforms carrying trees or scenery. To the crowd it looked like magic, a quiet moment, then suddenly a hatch would crack open and a leopard would explode outright at a man's feet. Rome also made sure the beasts stayed inside the pit. A poet from the 3rd century describes a smooth spinning drum mounted along the arena wall. When a big cat tried to claw its way up, the drum rolled under its paws and sent it sliding back down. Above it hung heavy nets, strung from carved ivory posts, shaped like tusks. The message was simple. There's no way out. You fight until the crowd gets what it came for. How did they get predators to attack on cue? The answer is ugly. Hunger and pain. Exotic animals were kept in menageries and conditioned for the arena. Trainers starved them so they'd come out desperate. If that wasn't enough, whips, hot irons, or prods forced them forward. The men sent out to face them weren't the doomed Noxi of the noon slot. Banars were specialists, drilled and armed with spears, nets, or short swords. Rome even had a dedicated training camp for them, the Ludus Matutinus, the morning school. It mattered because it let the organizers sell these hunts as contests, as if skill stood a chance against claws and teeth. The animals themselves told a story of the empire. Lions, leopards, and bears were dragged in from Africa. Wolves and boars from Europe, crocodiles and hippos from the Nile, rhinos from the far south, ostriches and bison, even stranger creatures, all pulled from the edges of Rome's world. It wasn't just about danger. It was about showing that the empire reached farther, wider, and deeper than anyone else. The supply chain is present in private letters. In the year 51 BCE, a man named Kelas kept pestering Cicero, then governor of Caesarea, to send him panthers for his shows. He begged for trappers, transport, anything. Cicero finally wrote back, half joking, that there was a shortage because all the panthers had already been trapped. The numbers are staggering. Augustus himself brags in his memoir that he staged 26 hunts where about 3,500 African animals were killed. At the grand opening of the Colosseum under Titus, Cassius Dio says about 9,000 animals, both wild and tame, were slaughtered. The Colosseum was, and still is, colossal. It's the great example of ancient Roman engineering. It was begun in 72 AD and under Trajan after his victories, and D sources claim about 11,000 animals were butchered across 120 to 123 days. We know what the crowds actually saw because the art survives. The Zlatan mosaic from Libya shows hunters with nets and spears, eons piping, referees gesturing, and leopards lunging. Once in a while, pity broke through. In 55 BCE, Pompey staged a 5-day beast show that ended with elephants in the circus. Ancient writers tell us the elephants lifted their trunks after being wounded, almost like they were begging for mercy. Cassius Dio says the crowd actually felt sorry for them and turned against the show. The fact that the moment is remembered at all shows how rare it was for pity to break through. And it didn't stop at Rome. In Britain, a 2025 osteology study from York revealed deep bite marks from a big cat on a man's pelvis, the first hard evidence of an arena mauling outside the city. He also showed signs of other trauma and a final decapitation, likely a sword finishing him after the beast. The ruins themselves still tell the story. In the 19th century, Botanists were stunned to find hundreds of foreign plant species growing inside the Colosseum. How did they get there? Most likely from the seeds hidden in the hay and fodder that fed Rome's exotic animals. During the games, those seeds spilled into the dirt and took root. Number 2. Damnio, ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. The blood of the morning hunts was only the opening act. When the sun reached its peak, the games shifted to something darker. Noon was reserved for executions, a block the Romans called ludi meridani. The philosopher Seneca once walked in, expecting casual midday entertainment. What he found he called plain butchery. Condemned men and women. The Noxi were dragged into the sand and thrown to beasts. Their deaths so routine the crowd could time them with their lunch. They included criminals, prisoners of war, rebellious slaves, and in certain eras, Christians. One sentence, they lost every shred of status. They weren't fighters with a chance to win. They were human targets. Many were tied to posts or strapped to platforms so lions, leopards, or bears could be released directly onto them. It wasn't a contest. It was a death sentence carried out through teeth and claws, staged as public entertainment. The staging was coldly efficient. Cages under the floor, opened by a trapdoor. If an animal hesitated, attendants whipped it forward or swapped in a hungrier one. If the beast didn't finish the job, an executioner stepped in with a sword. Scholars call these shows fatal charades because the deaths were staged as myths. Victims were costumed, sets were arranged, and the killings were written to match famous stories. Martial, a poet writing about the Colosseum's opening, shows us how it worked. He describes one man dressed as Orpheus trying to charm the animals with until a bear ripped him apart. He tells of the bandit, Laurellus, nailed to a cross and mauled. After the Great Fire of 64, the historian Tacitus says Nero looked for someone to blame. He chose the Christians, and what followed was torture, dressed up as theater. Victims were sewn into animal skins and ripped apart by dogs. Others were nailed to crosses. Some were set on fire so that Nero's gardens glowed at night with burning human bodies. Tacitus himself, who had little sympathy for Christians, still called these punishments refinements of cruelty. Humiliation was part of the cruelty. At Carthage, in the year 203, the Christian women Perpetua and Felicity were deliberately matched with a wild cow because officials thought a female animal was a fitting punishment for women. Guards stripped them naked, tied them in nets, and dragged them out into the arena. The crowd shouted at the indecency, so officials tossed loose tunics on them and sent them back out. The cow struck Perpetua so violently that she hit the ground hard on her back. Even then, her first instinct wasn't to cover her wounds. It was to pull her tunic back down over her thighs. The myths kept repeating. The Pacific stunt, based on the story of the underscore, Queen and the Bull, was staged for real with a living victim forced to play the role. Alongside Orpheus and Laura's, it showed the same grim pattern. Legends retold through human sacrifice. When childhood tales become scripts for live executions, you can see how far Rome had gone, and the crowd learned to love it. The Christian writer Tertullian mocked how Romans picked up a chant to the lion. It was shouted whenever disaster struck, whether floods, famine, or bad weather. It wasn't just one angry moment. It was a habit drilled into the public. Who to blame, and how to punish them. The system ran like clockwork, and mercy never entered the picture. Gladiators could win reprieve through courage or skill. The condemned never could. Number 1, damnio Adam, condemnation to the iron. It wasn't only beasts tearing the condemned apart at noon. The same midday block, the ludi meridiani, also forced prisoners to slaughter each other for the crowd's amusement. Once the animals were dragged off, guards shoved new victims into the arena. They weren't gladiators with training or contracts. They were criminals, rebel slaves, prisoners of war, or simply people the state wanted erased. The setup was cruel by design. Men were tossed broken gear, splintered shields, dull blades that bent on impact, even helmets cracked through the crown, and told to hack each other down. It was chaos, not combat. A man might kill one opponent, but that didn't save him. He was shoved into another round, and then another, until exhaustion or blood loss finally dropped him in the sand. The arena crews below worked the trapdoors like clockwork, sending up body after body, so there was never a pause. The gore was relentless. Blunt blades meant men were hacked apart slowly, flesh torn ragged instead of clean cuts, bones shattered through skin, guts spilled onto the sand and steamed in the midday heat. Corpses piled up until attendants with hooks dragged them off and rad fresh sand over the blood, leaving crimson streaks under the new layer. And the crowd ate through it all. Bread, fruit, olives, chewing, while men screamed their lungs out only a few feet away. There was no referee to stop it. No chance for mercy. No thumbs-up reprieve. The only outcome was death guaranteed. Seneca, who sat through one, admitted the chant of the crowd still echoed in his ears. Kill him, flog him, burn him alive. That's sedition, and for that they should be killed. He warned that anyone who stayed too long either grew numb to cruelty or got mocked for being soft. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.